Building a software business today requires lots of decisions. Building software isn't just about choosing a programming language or a framework or a database. Software developers have to choose the right cloud service provider, the best issue tracking service, the best hosted code repository, the clearest data visualization tools. We need a platform to compare the options between different products all in one place. In today's episode, we talk to Ayan Barua from Siftery, a platform for software products and the companies who use them. Siftery's mission is to help technologists find the best products for their job, whether they are a sysadmin or an advertising account manager. My discussion with Ayan covers the question of build versus buy, and how to build a recommender system, and how software will be built in the future. This is also a great episode for anyone who is thinking of how to build a two-sided marketplace business. Siftery, after all, is a business for software products and the companies who use them. So it is ultimately a two-sided marketplace. If you are a fan of Software Engineering Daily, tell us how to improve. Please fill out our listener survey. There is a link to the survey in our newsletter and at softwareengineeringdaily.com. We would love to know what you think. We want to know what you want to hear more of, what you want to hear less of. We listen to all of the feedback that we get, so please fill out the survey on softwareengineeringdaily.com or in our newsletter. After a quick word from our sponsor, we will get to this episode of Software Engineering Daily, Siftery, the platform for software products and the companies who use those software products. There are hundreds of tools for looking at user data. Google Analytics, Optimizely, Mixpanel, Customer.io, all of these tools can be useful for figuring out how users are engaging with a product. Unfortunately, many of these tools require you to write domain-specific code in order to gather the data and set up your integrations. What if I told you that there is a product for writing code only once, a single API, a tool for unifying your data and performing analytics on any platform, from Marketo to MailChimp? Segment is that product. Segment simplifies your analytics so that you can collect customer data with one API and send it to any of hundreds of tools for analytics, marketing, and data warehousing. With Segment, a developer can satisfy all the stakeholders at once, from the data-driven account manager to the app-happy marketer, to the data scientist who needs a data warehouse with a clean schema. Thanks to Segment, your CEO will fall in love with your newly efficient integrations with tools like Zendesk, Intercom, and AppNexus. I'm falling in love with Segment just talking about it. Thanks to Segment for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. If you are listening to Software Engineering Daily and you have not tried Segment, give it a shot at segment.com and tweet at Segment to let them know you heard about the product on Software Engineering Daily. We wouldn't be doing this show without the sponsors, so thanks again to Segment for sponsoring this show. Now let's get on with this episode. Ayan Barua is the CTO of Siftery, a platform for software products and the companies who use them. Ayan, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
What is Siftery?
Siftery, at Siftery, we are trying to build the ultimate company to product graph, which is basically the relationship of a buyer with all the tools, or a software adopter with all the tools and services that they are using at their work. And so it's like a giant recommendation system. The more data you provide to Siftery, we get better in understanding what your landscape is, and we recommend software based on what your stack is and what your similar company stacks are.
So Siftery's goal is to recommend the best software service for a particular scenario that a company might be in. Why is this useful to software engineers?
So software engineers, right? As a software engineer myself, right? The landscape is humongous, right? We have a certain stack, we have a certain preference. Every company has a certain preference around languages, around application architecture. It's important that we pick the right tools and pick the right software. That's like our tool chain. So Siftery allows, or Siftery helps software engineers to understand the software landscape better. So we can understand, as a platform, we can understand what exactly your stack looks like, and then based on that, so if you're a Rails stack, right, we can understand, okay, there are the gaps, here are the gaps, like you probably should pick up a logging framework which fits in naturally with every company probably that is using Rails. So that collab filter around the entire world is a pretty interesting dynamic for not only software engineers but almost everyone who's using software. You know.
Software engineering has always had this debate of build versus buy. And 10 years ago, the situation was often that if you bought software, you were compromising. You didn't get optimum quality, but it saved you time. And if you built your own software, you would get better quality, but it would take you months of extra developer time. And now there is an ocean of high quality software products that we can use as quick engineering building blocks. And it's no longer just like build versus buy. It's like build versus buy versus buy versus buy. And there's all these different products you can buy to solve any particular solution, any particular problem. So what is your current perspective on how engineers should approach the question of build versus buy?
I think if you look at startups in general, right, we optimize for speed. We need to get to the market as quickly as possible and with the highest quality possible. So I think like even if you're building on top of existing open source architecture. You're not really starting from scratch. All of us are standing on the shoulders of giants. So we are pretty much um, we are pretty much building all the time. um, all of the time it's not buy, because sometimes we are adopting open source, right? So we're not really paying dollars for an open source tool, but we are actually, our role in, especially in startups, when it comes to software engineering, it's a lot of assimilation that we are doing, right? So for example, uh, on Siftery, our search, right? So people are searching all the time, right? And we had the option of going grounds up with search, but a tool like Algolia, which is like fabulous, right? It just took the life cycle of building search from scratch by say 3 to 4 months, right? And we tuned Algolia to quite a lot. We tuned it quite a lot, but we eventually got it to a functional state, which is like really really good state around search in like a couple of weeks, right? So cutting down that, so hitting the market earlier is something that as a startup, as any company for that matter, is
Yeah.
pivotal.
Yeah, I think Algolia is like a perfect example. Comparing the speed of getting on board with Algolia versus rolling your own Elasticsearch or something like that. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
it's just
yeah.
so much time savings, and that time
Really time
translates.
saving, and their speed is terrific. I mean, I think we've put together a pretty decent software engineering team, but the consensus is that, like, holy shit, this tool, like, to replicate search like this, it will take a lot of time, right? So we had two types of searches. One was a site search, and one was another autocomplete that we built up grounds up. But eventually we realized that like we just need to flip to Algolia for this as well, because the quality of software that they've built is just mind blowing. And it's not only Algolia; it's just so many other tools. Like our entire infrastructure is on Amazon. It like I've been in the engineering side of things for like 1.5 decades now. It was very different earlier, and building on top of existing infrastructure is so easy right now. It makes so engineers can actually focus on the core problem of, if you have a business case and you have a product idea, we can focus on the core and not worry about will our website crash under traffic, because if you're on EC2, you can use the load balancer. You can basically create a cluster. You can have different type of data stores like Elasticache, RDS, and you can mix and match, and all of them is on the same cluster. So like scaling, we haven't scaled yet to the point that we would like to. But even traffic wise, right, when there is product hunt hitting you, tech crunch hitting you, right, earlier it was so much paranoia. Now it's like much calmer, I think. Like
So
from a paranoia.
I was going to ask about that. So like, when you guys announced on Product Hunt, you got to the top and you got all this traffic because of it, I'm sure. But I went to Siftery that day and there wasn't any traffic problems. So did you hit any scalability issues that day?
Yeah, we were like, I was tailing the logs and they were flying. They were like Matrix happening, right? I mean, the traffic was, the traffic was like, I didn't, because I was not on the other side of Product Hunt. This was the first time I was seeing this kind of a blow up happening. So the traffic was crazy, but I think we scaled well because, we kind of understood that the kind of the type of traffic Product Hunt brings is like very, very, very fast. The concurrency increases like crazy because everybody is hitting the website. So I think we used a couple of tools like Blitz, to understand like what level of concurrency we can handle, and then we prepared well because a lot of our data basically resides in Elasticache, which is basically Redis. So we have an architecture which is designed to read quickly, and the half of the data, like the data that is being constantly read, is on Elasticache. Some of it is in Postgres, which is in RDS. So I think we kind of designed that. We had that in mind that the concurrency is going to be important, because when you're blowing up on Product Hunt, you don't want to go down. That's a nightmare situation, right? That just kills the momentum. So we designed for it, but we didn't over engineer it. We just ensured that we can handle a lot of concurrence, and I guess that it worked out fine for product and as well as TechCrunch. TechCrunch has the same sort of effect.
And so right now, I imagine you have so many fewer rights because in order to write, you have to be a member of, well, you have to, as I understand, you have to be a member of a company that that is displaying their stack on Siftery. So like if I'm LinkedIn, for example, the only way, if I'm an employee of LinkedIn, or the only way for the LinkedIn stack to be edited is by an employee of LinkedIn.
Yep.
So you have a more light product offering right now. Do you expect like as this becomes more popular and you have heavier write traffic, do you expect that to become more difficult to scale?
I don't think it's going to be that difficult to scale, unless we like for a traffic heavy website like which is optimized for write. So for Twitter, it's very difficult because it's all write. Like write is heavily like the percentages between writes and reads are almost like. But for our case, I don't think we are going to hit that level of scalability issues anytime soon. But yeah, we have also designed the website in a way so that the read is easier. That also means that we had to like understand, because if you look at a group, right? I don't know whether you've seen a group. Like what we do in a group is we put together a bunch of companies, right? These companies could be any logical construct. So we put together like a Y Combinator portfolio or unicorns, or even we could say customers of Algolia or customers of Zendesk or something like that. Like so, and this is real time aggregation around all the data that all the company has, right? So the reads are, I won't say that they're complex, but we've had to optimize it because initially it was getting slower. You're hitting like the moment you hit a group, there's a lot of data coming from different sources. So yeah, we are right now read optimized, but I don't think we are going to hit write optimization scalability issues anytime soon. I mean, that's a good problem to have, though.
Absolutely. Certainly is.
Right now, we see that there are a lot of people who are signing up and giving us data, getting recommendations. If you look at the site, it's very click heavy. So the writes are happening, but it's not like textual write. You could just click and say that I'm interested or I'm not interested, or say I'm just, so it is, the writes are very subtle, let's put it that way. But it's still, as you said, that it is still a read optimized sort of website right now. It's a good problem to have. We
Yeah.
hope that there's more data coming in, because it's the design. If you look at the way it's designed, it's basically geared for a give to get model. Like, you give, the more you give, the more you get, right? And a lot of websites have come and gone who haven't really thought through the incentive structure around, like, if you look at a lot of review websites, it's actually work for you to go and do a review, right? So we had to think through the incentive structure. Like, first, like, our motto at Siftery would be, is basically to give first and then like, have an ask much later.
Yeah, that's a much more effective viral loop than the opposite one. So when people think of software engineering, they often think of someone writing lines and lines of code, but software these days is composed of a lot of building blocks, and you kind of touched on this earlier. It's like much easier to build software these days using these building blocks. One example I think of this is like a WordPress site that you can compose of a bunch of plugins that are created by people. And if I'm building a WordPress site, I don't even need to understand PHP. I can just put together these building blocks of plugins. And I'm curious if that exists on a higher level. If you see that on a higher level, like, are there any companies that you know of, perhaps on Siftery, that are able to build full-fledged software products by just gluing these different component pieces together without any internal technical specialists?
I think, like, if you look at software engineering, right? I mean, it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum from putting together really simple, clean websites, which could be a simple blog, right, to a complex ecosystem like, say, Quora, right? So I think it is, like, if you look at the spectrum, right, it just depends where your needs lie in terms of what sort of system you're building, right? If you're building a very complex data science driven machine learning sort of engine, then obviously there's a lot more grounds up work that you need to do. But if you're on the other side, where you are basically testing the market with a hypothesis, right, then you could probably have like a quick assimilation of a WordPress tool and WordPress, and then have Mailchimp integrated to it, and then just try to build your email list and stuff like that. So I think it's a spectrum, depends on what your use case is. I'm sure that there's a lot of groundbreaking, sort of bottoms up work that is happening in the AI field right now, because machine learning, like, we are just touching the tip of the iceberg. Like, we've probably not even touched the tip, right? So all that will require, like, the infrastructure is just not built out there when you talk about predictive analytics, and when you talk about complex ecosystems around data. Like, we're still building the infrastructure layer for it. So I'm sure that there is a lot of grounds of work there. But if you look at other lesser complex websites, I'm sure that it can be glued together with a bunch of tools. And then the software engineering itself is basically, it's around the integration, less around the engineering side of things, but it's also a lot of integration that we're doing. But as you see, right? I mean, simple systems like Twitter start off like a simple SMS system, but then when you hit a certain scale, you need to get the engineering going, right? You need to have, like, bottoms up thinking of the architecture, how it fans out, how it fans in. So I guess that it also is a function of scale. I mean, when you're starting, unless the product itself is a very, very complex engineering product. I guess that when you're starting out, it's basically a simulation of different tools and getting to market faster. But when you hit scale, obviously you have to think through all these things.
Yeah, this is an interesting.
Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, it makes sense. I think it's an interesting discussion because there is this. There's this trade-off between. So, like, not to sound too buzzwordy, but I think there is an interesting trade-off in the microservices versus monolith argument here, because if you've decided that you're going to be a company, a software product that is going to scale, if your heart set on scaling, perhaps you should build microservices from day one. But if you want to have this idea of, I'm just going to build this thing together, I'm going to throw it over the wall and start getting customer engagement and expect to hit scalability problems, then maybe you're content to build a monolith from day one. That's just I just say that as an interesting tension that I feel like we've covered on several episodes.
That is very interesting, because see, the business wants, like if you're building microservices, if you're building an API from day one, the engineering side of things need to be thought through, right? You can't just, like, for example, we talked about Algolia. I love the product. Their speed is in milliseconds, right? So I'm sure that they had to think about scale from day one, right? So because the pitch is basically, we will get you your results in less than 3 milliseconds. Yeah. Right? Like sometimes our queries are not fast enough on localhost, right? So they're doing a fabulous job there, right? So I think if you're building a microservice sort of architecture where it's all API driven, it's fabulous. That's probably the way to go. But there's always this tension with engineering and product and business, right? Engineering always needs more time.
I heard this anecdote about when they were building AWS, and I think they had the V1 of the product, and they presented it to Bezos, and they're like, "So we've got AWS version 1. What do you think?" And he's like, "Well, if in the event that this actually works out, it's going to fall over and it's not going to work." So there are certain products where you can't just build a monolith and throw it over the wall and hope for the best, because if you lose trust, that's your only life. You're dead.
Absolutely.
Instantly.
Absolutely. In this world where, everybody is used to a Facebook-like experience, Twitter-like experience, which is fast and snappy, right? The consumer doesn't want to understand whether you are a 2,000 member engineering team full of rock stars or you just one guy is logging it out, right? They want a fast, snappy, seamless experience from a consumer point of view. So at the end of the day, you have to sort of ensure that, you are at least meeting the baselines. The expectations have gone higher, right? It's the same with microservices and mobile approach. We can't take mobile users for granted. Earlier, we used to say that, let's put a responsive website. Let's just use Bootstrap. But the thing is that, that's okay for a minimum viable product, right? When you're showing it around to people. But for real users, the interaction design on mobile is very different. We had to at Siftery, we had to think it through. The mobile interaction is a little different.
Your company has important projects that need to get done. The iOS app needs to be rewritten for Android. The database needs to be migrated. Your continuous deployment system needs to be built. The website needs a complete redesign, but you don't have enough software engineers and designers to get all this work done. TopTal is here to save you. TopTal gives you exclusive access to the top 3% of freelance talent. Software engineers and designers, from Python to PHP. TopTal has the freelance talent you need to get your projects finished on time with top quality. In the past, we had to worry about flaky freelancers with poor communication skills, unreliable internet connections, subpar technical skills, and so on. TopTal screens for these kinds of things and only works with seasoned professionals with tremendous problem-solving skills, personality, and drive. Here's how it works. TopTal's internal team of senior engineers will work with you to understand your project scope and your talent needs, and they will custom match you with just a few hand-picked candidates. This means that whenever you need to add top-shelf talent for a critical project, you can be connected with pre-screened engineers who are hand-picked for your needs. And the results are impressive. TopTal clients conduct just 1.7 interviews for every hire that they make. All you need is to come ready with some decent technical specifications of your project, and TopTal's team of engineers will take care of you from there. If you are looking to add critical talent fast and you need a source you can trust, go to toptal.com/SEdaily. You can also send me an email directly at softwareengineeringdaily@gmail.com, and I will personally introduce you to the team at TopTal so that you can learn more. We live in unique times. The nature of work is changing, and more industry-leading companies from Airbnb to JP Morgan are realizing the benefits of scaling quickly and staying flexible by working with elite freelancers. So if you're short on resources for your projects, check out toptal.com/SEdaily. Thanks to TopTal for sponsoring the show. Now let's get on with this episode. So, we're talking about these building blocks, these software as a service building blocks that Siftery is kind of built to index. There's a group of people in the software engineering community who are open source fundamentalists, and many of the types of software that someone might potentially purchase on a place like Siftery, like Algolia, for example. Algolia is not open source, I don't think, right? It's not, is it?
It's not. It's a SaaS product, paid product.
Yeah, so is it healthy to have this streak of open source fundamentalism in the software engineering community, or do you think that it's counterproductive?
I don't think I look at it that way. I think it's mostly horses for courses. Like at Siftery, we are indexing open source also, right? So I don't think we fundamentally distinguish between Algolia or Elasticsearch as an approach. If you want to build search from grounds up, if that is a need that your product has, and you want to throw in Logstash and Kibana with it, right, and the entire package that goes with it, and you want to understand the search behavior analytics around it, you want to capture many more points, you want to tweak search the way you would like to tweak search in a way, because if it's a hosted search like Algolia, you can only there's a point to which you can stretch it, right? It's not, you can customize it to quite a bit, but if you're looking at customizing it to completely, I don't think, in that case, if that's the use case, then, you have to go the open source route. So for me, it is, coming back to the question, for me, it is, all of these tools can coexist. Right. We are using a lot of open source tools. We are also using a bunch of, paid products. Like our entire development is basically Vagrant, Chef. Like I don't think we've actually paid. We would like to pay. I mean, those pieces of software are fabulous, but 50 to 60% of our dev engineering stack is actually open source. So we love open source. I think open source needs to open source the issue with open source right now is that people are not making enough money off open source. It's a lot of times it is basically it's a good deal for around jobs and recognition and service contracts, but a lot of people are building really high quality software and they are not making direct money out of it. Some of the companies have scaled well, like Nginx and Docker, and they make money on the Red Hat sort of the model where you make money off support. But I think open source itself, going forward, like many years down the line, I really do hope that the core software can make money somehow, and it's not on support.
So speaking of the open source discussion, I think it would be awesome if there was a tool that could granularly measure how different open pieces of open source software compare against one another. So, for example, and I know this is really hard. So, for example, there are numerous JavaScript frameworks. There are numerous streaming frameworks. We've done so many shows about these big data streaming frameworks like Samza, Storm, Spark Streaming, Flume, and Flink, and there's just infinite of them. And I can't wrap my mind around how to compare them. And I don't think that even the people who are building them have a great idea of what the pros and cons of each of them are. Do you think this is something that you would eventually want to build into Siftery, like the ability to compare like the subtleties of an open source streaming framework?
Yeah, we are actually working on something on that already. Like we're building can't give away too many details, but we're building a comparison engine on top of the data that we are gathering, and it will have subtleties. I think the first few versions we might not get it spot on, but it is needed in the sense that comparison today, if you look at it, it should be contextual. It cannot be based on a few fixed parameters because the context changes, the usage context changes, the adoption context changes. So we hope to build a comparison sort of architecture which is driven off context and the type of customers or the type of stack. So I think that is why, our belief that your stack should sort of guide what the other tools should be. And that happens subconsciously. Like, we start at, like, every engineering house, if you look at, we start at certain framework, at certain language. We have language preferences. Some people like Java, some people like Python. We like Ruby, JS, right? So the moment we have an Angular, so our entire front end is Angular. So, like we are using a Rails app to sort of send the JSON data down the pipe. So I think, we would like to get to this sort of a comparison between frameworks and streaming service, as you say, but it's not easy to get it right on the day one because there are so many components and there's so many factors, right? But yeah, this world itself needs a little more clarity around, because we are going through this overabundance, right? It's hard at times, even for people who know their game. It's hard. Like if you ask me, Ayan, do you want to go Angular, Ember, or React? Honestly speaking, I don't know. Right? I actually don't know. I'm tempted to try out everything. And that is just not possible because every framework has its own sort of, ideology, right? Once you start liking and diving deep into something, you will sort of start liking it, right?
So how hard do you think that this recommendation engine is going to be to build? Like, do you think, because like if I think about collaborative filtering for books or videos, that is, I can understand how that would definitely be a highly functional, great recommendation system. But are software products a different category? Like, are there too many dimensions of subtlety to build a recommendation? I'm sort of like leading you. I'm sure that the answer is no, because that's exactly what you're building. But maybe you could give me a better idea of like how you would structure a recommendation system. Tell me about the recommendation system.
Yeah. So right now we have we started at a very basic collaboration filter, right? And then we went up from there. We muted a few category of products. It didn't make sense. We muted a few products that had high occurrence because right now the data set is skewed around a lot of analytics products, right? So if you look at the data set, right, some of it we've crawled. We've hit DNS, we have hit the websites, a lot of like everybody is using Google Analytics, right? So the first thing that we'll recommend is Google Analytics, because the whole world is using Google Analytics, right? So we had to go down deep, understand what recommendation systems, what we are recommending to different users, and we had to sort of dampen the overarching effect of the presence of a few products, right? So we started there. I think we're getting a lot of response around, yes, I would like to use. So this is also in the zone. Nobody has built something like this yet. So we are trying to understand, like what the behavior is. Right now, there's a lot of people, a lot of users who are saying that, yes, I'm interested, which means we are doing something right on the recommendations, right? It's
So
kind
you're
of,
saying the feedback process where you recommend something to somebody and they're like, oh, sure, I'm
yeah.
interested.
Yeah, so basically that we've built that in. The moment somebody says I'm interested, the moment somebody says that this doesn't make sense at all, this recommendation, right? We feed that into the system immediately, right? So it is basically, it's a hard problem to solve. The last mile is going to be very,
Oh,
very
yeah.
hard. We need a lot of firepower around machine learning, around understanding the core tenets of how people think around software, how they. But I think from a collab perspective, it is good place to start. I think 2 years down the line, our recommendation system will be completely different. It will have way more community data. It will have a little bit of subjective data as well. We can introduce other mechanics around who's using what. It's right now, it's just saying that I use this and I don't use this. It could be I use this and I love it, and I use this, I probably tolerate it, right?
Yeah.
And I use this, I want to change it. So once we start quantizing, if we can give a quantity, right now it's yes and no, and it's binary, one or zero. If you can break it down into a spectrum, I think the recommendations are going to get better over time. And also, like, I actually, the fundamental belief that we have is that, um, and this is how people go about. If you talk to a bunch of engineers, we actually we try to build on top of what we already have, right? If it's a rail stack, we will try and go and get something like Sentry or Honey Badger or Raygun, because these are meant to capture sort of the Rails logging. Rails has a log infrastructure, right? It basically spits out log in a certain way. There are certain tools, whether these are open source or whether these are paid products, right? Even in open source, right? Eventually, if you hit scale, you'll look for support, right? We started with Sidekick, which is an amazing queuing tool, right? And now we are considering that we should probably get the pro version of it, because now we've hit like we are hitting certain scale where it seems like having the right kind of support built around that queuing mechanism is probably the right way to go. So eventually, even for open source, I think the whole goal is, if the open source scales in a certain way, the maker of that project or that product can make money out of it. So
Yeah, it sounds like there are a percentage of cases where the recommendation is really straightforward. There's a really high probability that they'll say yes, and then there's this other percentage that is just like really, really hard, and it's really, really difficult to figure out what dimensions you want to be considering, like, in the axis of, when you're comparing streaming products or analytics products or JavaScript frameworks. Maybe these kinds of cases will be really the last mile that will be really hard to solve. But if you're doing something, if you wanted to recommend a chat application to somebody, that would be pretty straightforward these days. You just say you get Slack. So some cases are very easy.
some cases are very easy, some cases are very tough. A lot of median cases, so it's like a bell curve. Like, some of them are very easy, some of them are really, really tough, right? So I think we can do a little bit of human curation as well, right? I don't think we want to stay away and just become this software engine, right? We could bring in a little bit of human curation. How we can
The
bring
Stitch
that in
Fix
is,
model.
yeah. So how we can bring that in, we are not entirely, like, we just launched 10 days back, right? So I think we'll evolve over time where we can have a little bit of human curation, like dialogue going on around, what matters and what doesn't. These adoption of tools are really complex, and that's why till now, a company like Gartner or Forrester, which is basically consulting, these are consulting firms, right? These adoption curves for big companies, started at a dialogue. Like I need CRM, right? That's where it starts at, and then some people come in, they look at the entire stack, and a lot of that can be automated and data driven, but there could still be a little bit of human curation around dialogue. We can have a community of users recommending um, on top of the recommendations.
So, as I was preparing for this podcast, Siftery was actually a very useful tool because I was able to look at Siftery's entire software as a service stack. So I got to see, the components that you use to build Siftery. And so, for example, I know that you use AWS, and this is probably getting into another one of these comparison discussions that is too difficult to granularize. But why did you choose AWS over the other cloud providers like Azure or DigitalOcean?
I think it's kind of. Can I be honest here? It's probably habit. It's probably habit. I'm sure that Azure is a fabulous platform. AWS, I think, is deeply entrenched now, and also it's just. I guess that it's like Facebook. I'm just so comfortable with AWS, right? So I need to. Um, so yeah, I guess that's where they have a head start because they were way early. I mean, others didn't even realize what was happening. Nobody actually thought that that it's going to go this way, because like Microsoft, right? They have the best engineers in the world still. I mean, their engineering firepower is still there, right? It's not about pulling off a product like this. I think Azure or DigitalOcean is a fabulous product. I think just AWS has that entire offering around. Oh, you need a load balancer, throw it in. You need a bunch of these servers, throw it in. You need RDS, throw it in, right? Oh, I need to get this data out and put it on CloudFront. Oh, throw that in. So it's like this. I think we're spoiled for choice, and it's very convenient. So for me, AWS is just a lazy choice which works brilliantly. So,
When you use AWS, to what degree do you feel a sense of lock-in?
it's a huge lock-in. It's a huge lock-in. I think we have, like I have personally as the CTO contemplated um, multiple times whether we should just get a bunch of these servers and um, a bunch of these servers on something like SoftLayer. I've been on SoftLayer before. They are fabulous, like rock solid servers. They don't budge at all. I'm sure it's true for Rackspace and all other. And I am almost like I am almost as if I am on a pacifying spree to all the vendors. Like I'm naming all of them and I'm saying they're rock solid, but it's true, right? It's true. I mean, SoftLayer. I've been on SoftLayer. It's just awesome, right? But I think like my mind when I'm leading a startup, if it was a big company and we had like a 1 year horizon to ship a product, and we would think about DevOps from day one. I guess that I would consider building our own sort of server infrastructure from ground up. But if I'm thinking of 3 month, like Siftery, as you see, it is either 4 to 5 month product, and if you had checked it like in December, you would probably say that what a crappy product, because we didn't have our UX right and all that. So our focus was basically just on the core product, AWS or any such tool which sort of like gets us there faster, sort of helps out in us figuring out the core proposition around the product faster. I'm sure that if we have a lot of usage and there is different sort of APIs, we might need to look at the entire architecture again, and then we might say that, oh, this is what we need. And it's like I would say that right now it's convenience and laziness which works out brilliantly for me. But as we scale, we might need to go and own DigitalOcean servers or Rackspace servers. We just don't know yet.
Do you think there will be some sort of shift or technological breakthrough or allowance that will will loosen that lock-in, will make it easier for people to treat server space as more of a commodity? Like, maybe if you could use containers to quickly containerize your entire app and move it off of AWS. Do you think that's a possibility?
I'm sure it's a possibility. It's a very strong possibility. Docker is amazing that way. Even Core OS is making rapid strides. Um, from an engine perspective, I think as a CTO, I'm always worried about lock-in, right? As in, um, I don't want to get too dependent on a certain service. It's just good engine practice to hedge your bets around and control as much infrastructure as you can. So I think that is definitely true. Docker doesn't have mass penetration yet. I mean, it's Silicon Valley and the early adopters right now. It's a fabulous piece of product. We tried it out, but personally, I was more comfortable with Vagrant and Chef, that infrastructure. Right? Chef is also awesome. But yeah, I mean, I think as Docker matures and it has more and more penetration, and it becomes sort of a necessity, or it becomes ubiquitous, right? Like Nginx is ubiquitous, right? If you look at it, like we crawl like 150,000 websites. Everybody is on Nginx. I mean, not everybody, but you know what I mean, right? So
Sure.
once Docker has that ubiquity, I think that it will just help in getting control back of your infrastructure. You can basically say, "Oh, here is my container. I can just put it on AWS or DigitalOcean." And I'd love that, actually. I'd love that.
Yeah.
It's a truly distributed sort of deployment that I'm doing. Traffic is also being redirected to wherever it's coming from. So some of them could be DigitalOcean servers, some of them could be Rackspace. It's personally we haven't hit that scale yet. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very interesting what's happening today, with the entire container architecture. It's very interesting. I think it's a fundamental difference in how software has been built over the course. Like VMware did, VMware pushed the boundaries, and then now Docker is doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I think it'll just take a little more time to penetrate every dev house possible. Right now, Docker is a little bit like, I have talked to a lot of my friends. There is a lack of confidence, not in Docker, but the dev himself. So I might come off saying that I don't know Docker enough, right? I need to invest time there to understand the power of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I understand Chef better, so let's just stick with Chef and play around with Docker and eventually go there, right? So that mass penetration is slowly happening now. I think within a few years, Docker will be way more, or the whole container. I think there'll be more, like Core OS is there. There might be another player, couple of players. Amazon launched its own container service, right? So
Yep. ECS.
so basically it is like it's going to be interesting. It's like you running software engine daily. It's like you will be at the center in terms of understanding how this is going to pan out, because this is an interesting dynamic going on out there.
Yeah, that's very flattering.
From a question point of view, the monopoly you're talking about, right? The bad part, I guess, is basically most of these products want a monopoly, right? Startups are around creating the huge win, and most of these are startups. A lot of open source software has gotten that monopoly and has become a startup, like Nginx or Elastic. So I guess that there's a healthy tension between your aspiration as a startup, trying to be a monopoly, right? And sort of also having, like, from a consumer standpoint, I think more options are better. because there's then healthy competition. But from a startup point of view, everybody wants a monopoly. Like everybody wants to be the Facebook of their own category, right? So yeah, that there's a healthy tension going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So getting back to your software architecture, so products like Facebook and Quora and LinkedIn, they need to build these complicated taxonomies to represent the different entities that exist across these platforms. So Siftery, it's still in its early days, and you're building out the taxonomy to represent companies and the products.
Mm-hmm.
How do you build a taxonomy that is rich enough to represent the products and the companies on that platform, but also flexible enough to support different taxonomic schemas in the future?
Yeah, I think our idea was basically like when we started working on it, our taxonomy was really complex, right? As engineers, we try to over engineer at times. I think we've gone back and made it very simple. If you look at the category structure, it's just two layer right now. I think um, we would like to keep it as flat as possible. If you look at Quora, it's a really complex sort of taxonomy there, and I'm sure that the other companies that you mentioned have really complex ones, but they also have that kind of a scale, right? I think for us, Siftery, we've kept it simple right now, uh, but right, but what we want to do also is build a sort of a tagging mechanism, which is not really like in a tree structure. It's more free flowing, right? Inboxes versus labels, some kind of a taxonomy which is more uh, not which is less hierarchical and more
Mm.
more sort of free flowing and loose, right? I can tag a product into, like, if you go to Siftery right now, a company can be tagged into a Y Combinator portfolio, healthcare, technology, or unicorn. So if you look at the relationship between a unicorn or a healthcare technology is not very, like, it's not tightly coupled. So I think for a system like Siftree, we're trying to be a loosely coupled taxonomy sort of system. It is still, like, it's still evolving, but right now we are trying to keep it like less hierarchical and more like sort of open ended, so that we
On,
can.
Qu- on Quora, I think it's interesting because you get a sense that they do both. Like from the user's point of view, it's totally flat. If you tag a question as software engineering and software architecture,
Mhm.
from the user's point of view, there is no coupling between those two. They're just two disparate
Yep.
categories. But you have to imagine on the back end, there
Yep.
is some sort of hierarchy where those are connected. But they can change and mix and match and refactor that however they want to, and it's totally not exposed to the user.
Yeah, I think they also have a much more. The challenge of Quora is that the data is less structured, right? You can open up any topic today, and it's difficult for. So a lot of their tagging and retagging is actually moderated, right? So it's not automated. A lot of it is actually moderators stacking it themselves, right? So I think for a system like Quora or Google, for that matter, or even Facebook, I think the data is way less structured. For a system like Siftery, the structure is inherent. So I don't think we had to have, we didn't like had to worry about taxonomy to that extent that Quora would want to have, because it's just less structured data. I mean, you can open up a tag today, open up a question. It might be very difficult to put it in any category. We probably will go there in terms of, right now the categories are pretty broad, right? We can break it down further, right? If you look at analytics, like, there could be so many types of analytics. So if you look at log streaming, there could be so many types. So I think, rather than putting it in terms of subcategories and subcategories and subcategories, I think we can do a taxonomy which is more user driven, which is like, like this type of product is being used by people who are doing podcasts, right? So QuickTime will be like, like SED, like something like
Oh
some.
man.
So that kind of stuff that we can do, and that also goes into the recommendation engine. Like we are not driving the recos. Yet the taxonomy is not fed well into the reco engine. We want to do that at some point of time.
Yeah. So what are you focused on right now? Because obviously there's so many different directions you could go in, but I imagine you are honing your focus in on one or two product initiatives. What are you looking at the most?
I think the primary focus of 2016 is to build a very good, and rich product to company graph, which can drive off the recommendations. That's the only goal. I think we've stayed away from putting textual content in. We've stayed away from reviews. We've stayed away from voting. These are very low-hanging fruits that when you build out, it's very tempting for you to build it because the rest of the world is building it. I think a lot of emails have come to me because, like, a lot of emails have come to me, which where the users are saying that, like, how did you resist
The comments.
the comments?
Yeah.
The like, how did
That's
you resist
that's
it?
a high interest credit card.
Yeah, because it's just, how do you resist it? How are you not? Why are you not doing? Two things we actually resisted. One is textual content, and it is now counterintuitive because it's now working. Right? Initially, we were not sure whether it'll work or not but the entire world is review focused, and reviews are hard to keep up with. Most of these reviews, if you see, like, 2012 review doesn't make sense anymore. It's 2016 now, right? So constant, and the incentive structure around someone giving us reviews. So we try to stay hard. We try to stay away from it. And also the other thing that we did was, had a very lively feel to the website. Right? It is like a B2B2C company. So sorry, B2B2C product. So we had to sort of, like, all the rest. I mean, we consciously tried to keep it very, very young and lively with colors. It is almost like this product which you enjoy. It's B2B, right? B2B is not supposed to be uh, this lively at times, right? But that's also something that we built around. Our designer is like a 22-year-old whiz kid, so he brings in that youth, which is reflected around the product. But yeah, from a
Totally.
from a from a focus point of view, I think we want to build the best sort of product to company graph, and we will probably focus most of our energies there, and not get into the temptations. The other thing other thing I wanted to sort of bring up, I forgot. It's very easy to monetize if you look at it, on the vendor side of things, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that because then the buyer will lose faith in us that you are shopping us around. So even though, so we've stayed away from that temptation also, and we are going to stay away from that temptation. You can quickly make a lot of money on the vendor side because vendors want to spend their marketing dollars on platforms where buyers are hanging out, right? So we have, basically, this is a platform which is geared towards buyers, and we will do everything that is in our capacity to get the buyer experience right now. We are just doing selection. um, it doesn't have to stop there. It could be usage also. How much are you spending? How much should you spend? What is your quarterly spend on your sales tools? Right? Maybe you are spending like 200% more, right? So a lot of analytics can come from the platform, and I think our goal, 2016 beyond goal, will be to do everything in our capacity to help out the buyers, wade through this overabundance of software, as Oren had mentioned in his blog.
Yeah. Well, we'll put that blog post in the show notes. Ayan, I want to thank you for coming on Software Engineering Daily. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I am a huge fan and a user of Siftery. So I look forward to the future product iterations.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and great to talk about what we're building at Sifter. Thanks.